King Henry, Derrick Henry, Tennessee Titans. He's the back-to-back leader in both yards, carries, and touchdowns across the National Football League. An absolute stud after having some so-so years to start his NFL career. I mean, he is the guy in Tennessee. Everything runs through him. I mean, because of him, Ryan Tannehill looks like a good quarterback. Derrick Henry last year going over 2,000 yards. I think only what is it? Last year, he became the 8th player in NFL history to rush for 2,000 yards in a single season. And now he's going to get an extra game too, which the Titans are probably going to need him down the stretch. It always feels like in December, these past couple seasons, that Tennessee is right there in the mix and they need Derrick Henry to carry him. His more or less number is 1,550.5. How do you feel about the King?
Man, this number is really low, right? I mean, for a guy who, we just talked about some of the injuries that Dalvin Cook has had. Derrick Henry really carries none of those concerns. I mean, his 5 NFL seasons, it's been 15, 16, 16, 15, 16 in terms of games played. So I don't know if this is maybe a little bit of a natural regression after running for over 2,000 yards last year. If you look back, like Adrian Peterson rushed for like almost 800 fewer yards the year after he got to 2,000, also missed a couple games that following year. Chris Johnson regressed in a major way after he went for 2K. He lost about 700 or 800 yards as well. So, the 2 most recent examples we have, maybe that just kind of scares off, the line makers here. You kind of look at it as there's no possible way he could be as productive as he was last season. And that's probably true. The question is, does he take that big of a step back, especially if he's playing 17 games? I think the Titans are in a pretty good spot to potentially win the AFC South, especially with as bad as the Jaguars looked in every single facet of the game last night. I've completely lost faith in them as like a dark horse contender. Obviously the Texans are going to be terrible. We'll see with the Colts, but it does feel like Tennessee has kind of emerged as like weirdly maybe the safest team in that division. But at the same time, they're not the Chiefs, they're not Tampa Bay, they're not Green Bay, where you say, maybe they're resting starters week 17. I don't think they'll be quite that dominant. So you're giving a guy who rushed for almost 127 yards per game last year, potentially 1 extra game to add to his ledger. And we're talking about a guy who, as you mentioned, gets better and better the deeper we get into the season. I mean, who's to say he wouldn't have tacked on another 200 yards to that final total if he had a week 17 or a week 18 game, I guess, last year. So I like Derrick Henry to go over. I would imagine that's going to be the popular sentiment here. The argument against it, I guess, is, this Titans passing game, should be, I guess, as good as last year, if not better, with Julio Jones essentially stepping in for Corey Davis. You have a really good receiver in AJ Brown. Obviously the tight end situation is a little bit unsettled, but you're either worried about injury, which for Derrick Henry is not a concern to me, or you're worried about, defenses keying so heavily on Derrick Henry that, they're basically selling out to stop the run. I just don't know if you could do that against the Tennessee Titans right now, given who they have at receiver. If Julio were to get injured, maybe that's a different conversation. But I mean, if you prorate it out, if you think Derrick Henry plays 16 games, he could lose 30 yards per game off of last year's yards per game total and still go over on this number.
Yeah. I mean, Derrick Henry's he's an absolute monster. He's built like a Mack truck. I think he's 6'3", 250, something like that. And that's all muscle. But he's missed one game in his NFL career due to a hamstring in 2019, but he bounced right back. He was the league leader in rushing yards that season. So a couple side notes about Derrick Henry here. If he leads the league in rushing again, he'll be the first guy since Emmitt Smith to lead the league 3 straight seasons in rushing yards. Emmitt did that back, I think, in 91 through 93. And also another side thing with Henry is he's led the league in touchdowns each of the last 2 seasons. No one since the merger, the AFL and the NFL merged, has done that 3 straight years. So that's something to keep an eye on with Henry as well. And
Toby Gerhart never did that?
No, Toby Gerhart never did that. I think Shoelace Robinson was taking too many carries.
Yeah, I was saying. Maurice Jones-Drew, Fred Taylor, none of those guys? Man.
Well, unfortunately, no. Didn't MJD squat down in front of the goal line a few times too in his career? So
yes, I feel like he was on the forefront of killing fantasy owners with that.
Yeah, and then Ahmad Bradshaw saw that and did it in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. Yeah. But,
oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, Derrick Henry, as you mentioned, just gets stronger as the season goes on. He kind of reminds me to compare this to baseball, to Justin Verlander in his prime, where how his fastball would get faster as he threw more pitches. That's kind of like Derrick Henry here. He's carried the ball a whopping 782 times, including the playoffs in the last 2 seasons. So I don't think there's anything to worry about. He's still just 27 years old. I think we're a few years away before he falls off and really takes a step back.